Welcome to GovCon Unscripted, where we dive into the unfiltered stories and strategies from all around the world of government contracting. Join host Chelsea Roberts as she explores how to navigate, thrive, and win in this complex but lucrative industry.
All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to GovCon Unscripted. I'm your host, Chelsea Roberts, CEO of Collaborative Compositions, and today I've got with us Steven Koprince, GovCon industry expert and just phenomenal industry voice out there in the GovCon environment. So, Steven, who are you and what do you do?
Chelsea, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you today. You've got such a great show, and I'm happy to be part of it. So thank you for inviting me. So yeah, my name is Steven Koprince. If you know me, maybe you've seen me around on your LinkedIn feed or whatever, but I've been involved in federal government contracting for more than 20 years now. Most of that time as an attorney. Founded a law firm called Koprince McCall Pottroff LLC, which is a boutique law firm focusing exclusively on federal government contracting, served over 1,000 clients, mostly small businesses, but even some billion-dollar international corporations. Then a couple of years ago, getting a little burned out, decided to hang that up and move into other areas of the government contracting field. So my former partners are still running that firm, doing a great job with their team, but I focus now on education, teaching courses in government contracting. I recently started a blog and newsletter, so folks can hear my dad jokes as well as government contracting information in the newsletter. Serve as a board member of a federal contractor, and I'm always posting on LinkedIn and up on Substack now as well on things that I think will be of interest to the government contracting field. So I wear a lot of different hats right now, but my background is primarily as an attorney with small business focus.
Interesting. Now, I think you are the first lawyer that we've had on the show. Congratulations. That's huge.
Maybe that's why you're getting nominated for awards. There's not enough lawyers. We don't want to hear these dry lawyers give legal advice and such. So yeah, well, I'm a non-practicing lawyer, so it only counts. It's like I'm half a lawyer.
And all thoughts and opinions are your own, and obviously not the representative of the government or other legal entities. So we'll enter with that caveat, and folks can take this as legal advice, but ultimately want to have you on retainer if they're going to do anything actionable with that insight.
Yeah, so this is a conversation. It's not legal advice. I'm not your attorney. I'm not anybody's attorney right now because I'm not actively practicing law. If anyone listening does need legal advice in the federal contracting space, I'm more than happy to give you recommendations of folks that I know and trust in the field they're not paying me for this or anything. This is just because I want people to have good representation, but I wouldn't be doing it personally at this point.
Well, that's a great offer, and we're definitely going to have, I'm sure, plenty of audience members take you up on that. Just familiar with the legal environment in the government contracting world is a lot. There are a lot of legal nuances that I think are overlooked and probably taken for granted. And there's just a lot of information out there, and I think it tends to get conveyed poorly, and it's confusing, it's complex, any number of words that you could use to describe the legal environment in government contracting. And you've seen, I think, probably a lot in your time in being just in this industry. So I'm curious, over the past couple of years, just from the legal standpoint, it seems like there's been a lot of changes to legislation, changes to rules, things like that. And I'm curious what the biggest things that you've seen in terms of changing legal environment you've seen in the federal world just over the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, what I tell people who don't know this industry, I was a lawyer practicing federal government contract law, and they're like, really, you can do that full time? Like just that topic? I'm like, oh yeah, it's really deep. There's a lot going on in terms of the rules and regulations that govern this industry, and it's always changing. But I think you hit the nail on the head that in the last couple of years, perhaps even more so than usual, they're always developing new rules. Congress is coming in, writing new statutes that impact contractors. But in the last year or two, we've seen some really fundamental changes and some big conceptual shifts in the legal environment in the space. And so I think a lot of contractors have probably heard first and foremost is this Revolutionary FAR Overhaul. And that is the process of stripping down and rewriting that baseline federal acquisition regulation that governs most federal procurements. And so that was kicked off by an executive order that was issued about a year ago. And sometimes it takes the FAR Council, which writes these rules, years to come up with a single rule. And the president said, you got 6 months to do the whole thing, go through the whole thing and rewrite the whole thing. And they did it. And it's still in a process where it's a temporary deviation from the base FAR, but you're going to see a lot of different rules that applies a lot more discretion for contracting officers is one of the focuses of the regulation. For example, there's more discretion for when a contracting officer can have what's called clarifying communications or clarifications with an offer. In other words, we're interested in this offer's proposal, but this little piece of it we're not so sure about. And when can the government just reach out to that one offer by itself in a competitive situation, have those communications? The rules were pretty strict before. They're not as strict now. So one of the underlying tenets of this was more discretion for contracting officers, more flexibility, maybe in some cases buy a little more like a business. And I always hesitate to use that language because the government's not a business, and there's a lot that goes on in the government contracting world that businesses wouldn't do because it doesn't make business sense, but it makes good public policy sense. So I'm always a little hesitant, but still borrowing some of the best practices from business in terms of discretion, in terms of flexibility, in terms of efficiency, and in terms of pushing toward more commercial item buys and using more what we call best-in-class vehicles, consolidation of some of these vehicles so that we don't have 10 different ways of buying the same thing. So there's a lot really happening in the government contracting space just on that macro level. And then we see within our certification environment for small businesses, a lot of changes happening there as well. For example, there's been a push on the 8A side in terms of whether you call it enforcement or whether you call it kind of micromanaging, whatever you want to call it, where 8A contractors have been, some have been suspended as from the program for not data and so on and so forth. So there's some changes going on in the certification programs as well, alongside these kind of revolutionary FAR macro changes to how we think about doing government buying, how the level of discretion we give contracting officers, and trying to improve efficiency as a government buyer.
Now, I think you said something really interesting to me, and it's about giving contracting officers more discretion. And I think that's something that's long overdue. It's needed, obviously, and there's some drive behind those changes. But I think that when I talk to contracting officers, when I hear segments of things from the Warfighter Acquisition University, when I have gone through some of their training, it's very focused on how not to go to jail, how to CYA when it comes to making good decisions on behalf of the government and using taxpayer dollars. And so I think there's reasons why that discretion was reduced. And so I'm curious, do you think that those changes are welcome, or are folks a little scared that they might be wandering into some dangerous unknown territory by leveraging that discretion?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, great point. And I've heard some folks who, my background, of course, is on the industry side. Now, I've never been a government contractor. I worked in government for only a year and a half or so, and I've been on the industry side ever since. So I don't have the experience of being a contracting officer, for example. But I do know from talking to folks on that side of the industry, as well as hearing from thought leaders who have that background, that what you're saying is spot on, and that there's long been a philosophy among many in government of risk aversion, right? And in some cases in our world of government contract, bid protest aversion. So trying to avoid the situation where the contractor files a bid protest. And some have pointed out, and not just me, although I have, but some on that side is overblown because only 1% to 2% of acquisitions are protested. And the number is actually down significantly over the last 10 years. So protests are actually dropping. But that said, there's a lot of this kind of risk aversion mindset where we don't want to put ourselves or our agency in a situation to end up in litigation, to get protested. And in some sense, you can't avoid it. So someone can file a frivolous protest for anything, but we're talking really about a good protest, one where they may have a basis. And so I think it's going to take a conceptual mindset, because some of the stuff that we're talking about, the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul, really was already there. Contracting officers already had a fair bit of discretion. They have more under certain areas under Revolutionary FAR Overhaul, but they already had some, and were self-selecting in some cases not to use it because they didn't want to maybe get challenged on how that was going to happen. So I think you can write the rules however you want, but you also have to change minds, I think, within government if you want to really take full advantage of that. Say, no, we're good here. The GAO, if their bid protest is there, is going to have our back. The Court of Federal Claims is going to have our back. We've got the discretion. Now we need to be comfortable using it, and that's a mindset shift. And so, and on industry side too, they're used to this risk averse sort of mentality too. And so protest threats sometimes, do more damage than protest. Believe me, I've been guilty of this. I've reached out to contract officers and threatened protests over stuff we didn't like. And I know that could be effective. And then believe me, this is when we thought we had a good case, where there's something wrong. But industry is going to have to reevaluate some of these things too, and say, hey, this is something we didn't like is it's still within the contracting officer's broad discretion, especially under these rules. And so we're not going to threaten a protest. We're not going to file a protest because now we understand that even though we don't like the decision, they have the ability to make said decision. So it'll take a bit of a mindset shift on industry too, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a pretty substantial shift, especially when you're thinking about if that relationship is worth maintaining. And I'm assuming protests don't typically end up in good relationships that come out of them with the government afterwards.
And here's my take on that. It's a very good question or a point, because the relationship question is key, because I've filed many protests, but I probably talked more contractors out of filing them than I've filed protests. And at the heart of it a lot is this relationship question. And so to me, I'd say, look, obviously filing protest is not going to make somebody happy, but is it going to put a black mark on you that's going to go with forever? You're never going to get another government contract. And the answer can be very easily found out by looking at who's getting awarded federal contracts and comparing it to who's filing protests. And a lot of times they're the same companies.
Yeah.
So it's not true that if you file a protest, you're never going to work for the government again. However, in my opinion, to avoid the relationship problem, you need to do a couple things. First of all, if there's a chance to solve the problem without filing a protest, you should take that chance. And so when I say I threatened to protest, that sounds really bad, but I could have just filed a protest. I didn't have to file a protest. And so I sent the contracting officer an email first. And then when I say threat, I'm like, we really don't want to file a protest. We don't want to file a protest. However, look at what you say in the solicitation. It's not right. It's against the FAR. So could you please do something about it? And it could be seen as a threat, but it's also letting them fix the problem internally without it coming to litigation. So I think when there's the chance to do that, you take that chance and you try to fix the problem that way first. Now they know that if you protested, you still tried to work it out with them. And it's a business decision. Now they disagreed. All right, we disagree, and we're going to go to the GAO. The second thing that I would say is don't make it personal, because when you have a business disagreement with the government, hey, we think this contradicts the FAR that we put in the solicitation. They say, no, we actually don't think it does. All right, let's let the GAO resolve it. That's a business dispute. If a contracting officer is going to hold that against you personally, then that's on them for being a little thin-skinned, because it's just a dispute. However, if you go in and say this contracting officer is biased against my company, they hate me because of whatever reason there may be, ethnicity or gender, or whatever, you're making a very personal statement about somebody. You've taken a business dispute and made it personal. Plus, those biased protests almost never win. There's been one successful protest in 30 years that I found in research. So you got an unsuccessful argument that also is personalized a business dispute. And I could see a contracting officer saying, man, I don't want to do business with somebody who accuses me of being a racist or whatever. So those are my 2 points for that thing. But that said, always think carefully before you file a protest. But just doing it is not necessarily going to lead you with a bad relationship with the agency, as long as it's done cautiously, good faith, just business sort of thing.
Take the emotion out of it and keep it fact-based and level-headed. I think that's the best way to approach most things in life these days. So you said something that surprised me. You said the number of the protests has gone down over the past 10 years. And I'm curious, do you see that trend reversing? Do you see them going up? And let me just drop a little tidbit in here and say AI has given folks the ability to probably raise issues that they would never have raised before. So do you see having AI founded and funded protests increasing? And do you see the number of protests increasing just with the use of AI?
Yeah, those are great questions. So first things first, there has been a pretty substantial drop in protests over the last 10 years. It's frustrating to those of us who know the numbers, because you see these headlines out like, everything's getting protested. But that's because usually it's like in the news where the crime leads the local news. You think that crime is everywhere, where in fact, oftentimes crime is down. And so when you see CIO SP4 got protested or whatever, and it did, and the protesters won, but that's neither here nor there. Those make headlines, and then people are like, everything gets protested, because there's some high-profile protests out there that are drawing attention. And when you're a government official and your acquisition gets protested, it feels like everything's getting protested. When you're an awardee and your acquisition gets protested, it feels like everything's getting protested. But in fact, the protests are down substantially over the last 10 years, something like 30% or something like that. They're down quite a bit. And GAO has said, we can't tell you for sure what the reasons are, but one reason most likely is that the Department of Defense, Department of War now has been providing these enhanced debriefings, and they're losing unsuccessful offers more information about why they lost. And there was a mindset among some in government that the more you give somebody, it's like giving them more rope to hang you with, right? They're going to protest more. I always said before this enhanced debriefing came along, I think it's the opposite. I think that when you give people more information, it will give people like me a better chance to advise my client as to whether it's a good protest or not. When all I have is a just the facts, ma'am, very bare bones debriefing, we may say we have to figure out if we have a good protest. We essentially have to file the protest and get discovery, either through the GAO or through the court, to really tell. If you give me more information up front, I now have a better chance to talk my client out of protesting if I think the facts don't support it. And so I think that GAO agrees with that too. And it said, look, the more people know about why they were unsuccessful, the more chances they have with working with advisors, attorneys, or even just independently to put emotion aside, look at the facts and say, you know what, we're not going to throw good money after bad. We don't need to file a protest based on that. So I think that's one reason why protests have probably declined. Now, the AI thing is interesting because some folks are using AI to write their protest. And GAO, unlike the court, you have to have an attorney to represent you in court. You can file on your own behalf at GAO. And people have often tried to represent themselves at GAO. I still think that's a really bad idea. I think it's like trying to do your own surgery or something if you're not a doctor. But AI has given people, I think at this point, and the tools are still in development, some false confidence that, I'll just get ChatGPT to write my protest for me. And that's ChatGPT ESQ square, And so they will do that, but the ChatGPT or whatever program you use, and they're obviously ones that are targeted more toward government, my experience are not there yet when it comes to being able to really take on that function successfully. There are a lot of cases that have been filed over the last couple of years by folks using AI to write a protest in which it's chock full of what we call hallucinations, which are, if a human did it, it's called pulling stuff out of your you-know-where. It's making stuff up. And they do this. It makes up cases. It makes up quotes. It cites real cases for fake principles and all this stuff. That gets your case tossed out pretty quickly out of GAO because they say you don't have any actual legal support. What you have is you're wasting our time with these hallucinations. And so I do think that as the tools continue to develop, they'll get better. There'll be fewer hallucinations. They'll be better and better at doing this. But right now, it seems to be too complex a task for AI to successfully take on. However, what GAO has now done in response to a congressional statute that was just recently passed is it's upped its pleading standard. It basically said to come in and file a protest, you have to have a higher threshold to get in the door in the first place. And so we're not going to get into all the legalese on that, but what it means is that essentially protests that look pretty frivolous on their face are more likely to get tossed out early on. So that may be a counterweight to this AI protesting. And my familiarity with AI is not nearly what some folks are, but I will tell you that some of the kind of public AI programs are very eager to please. They want to tell you what you want to hear. And so if you're like, protest this case for me, even if the protest is terrible, the AI is probably unlikely to say, don't do that. Unless you ask it to evaluate your case, then it might say that. But if you just say, write me a protest, it's probably not going to come back with a, how about I don't write one because it's a terrible protest, which is what an attorney might do. So keeping that in mind for folks using these programs.
Yeah, I figure if you say please in your AI chat and say, please protest this for me, it's going to come up with any number of things. And no matter how irrelevant or incorrect they are, I will say that the tools are really good at making it seem like all of the FAR references it's pulling are accurate and all of everything. It's case history and everything, like precedent that it's pulling. It looks so good and you're like so convinced. And I will say that you can go through all of them and make sure they're all right. Say the first 10 of 11 are right. It will always be that one that you didn't check that will be the wrong one that will come out and that will bite you in the end, 100%.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And look, that doesn't mean you can't use AI to help you write a protest, but AI should be viewed as a tool, a starting point, and not the end all be all. So if you're going to use it to kind of help you reduce your workload on a protest, fine, great. It can be a good research tool, can help you out, but you got to go then put the human level on top of that because of these problems with the hallucinations, or it'll come up with what is a correct case and a correct citation. But then when you read the case, you find out that your side lost. And so it's pulling and cherry picking a quote that sounds good, but the result is bad. And you don't want to cite that case either because the result is bad. And this is across the board. I just heard from my daughter yesterday, who's a freshman, that people were getting in trouble because they had submitted essays on Pride and Prejudice, and the AI was inventing quotes from Pride that weren't in Pride and Prejudice. So it's across the board.
Oh man, if you haven't read the book, you would never know. You'd be like, wow, this is great.
It sounds like Jane Austen Pride. Yeah, like that's good.
Totally. Oh my goodness. It sounds like it could be a huge time suck for GAO. It sounds like it could result in time waste on industry side, just going out and thinking everything's protestable now in the world of AI. But reality, I think, given that folks are getting more discretion, I think that gives an environment in which it is less legally treacherous to make some of those decisions. And I think that's probably going to hopefully increase or at least accelerate the reduction of protests that are being filed. So I hope that trend keeps trending downward. You mentioned something else that I'm curious to get your thoughts on, the certification programs. Everyone in the 8A program right now is probably a little concerned. I think entrants into the program have dropped significantly. There's probably a group of folks that were considering it that now don't believe it's going to be of any value. And there's conversation been happening for at least a year now about whether the program is actually going to stick around. And I recognize that it's going to take a congressional act to eliminate the program in whole or to change it in whole or in part. But I think the concern comes in when agencies are being discouraged to award 8A sole source contracts. Previously, it was like an easy button. I think it was called an easy button throughout industry, throughout government. It's, oh, do you have an 8A? Okay, great. That's an easy button. And it's just curious, do you think that with all of the oversight and all of the investigation into the program, that's going to result in, one, the program going away? And then two, do you think that it's going to impact the buy side of it? Do you think that all of this fraud talk and abuse and waste talk is going to leach into the minds of the buyers and reduce the amount of sole source 8As that we see in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 8A is in a state of a little bit of turmoil right now.
Yeah.
You're correct to say that it is a statutory program. So just getting rid of the 8A program, because the president can't unilaterally get rid of the 8A program. The SBA administrator can't unilaterally get rid of the 8A program. That would take an act of Congress. However, what we've seen is an administration of the program that is very different than we've seen previously, including in the president's first term. And as we sit here and talk today, it's been more than 250 days since the SBA admitted a single new company to the 8A program.
Wow.
And they usually admit several hundred per year, and they've not admitted a new entrant since August 2025.
Wow.
And at some point, just remember, 8A program, you can only stay in up to 9 years.
Right.
And so as firms graduate, if nobody's being let in, the program starts to die just a sort of a natural death on that of itself. There's no telling if and when the SBA is going to resume, that I know of anyway, admitting companies. That may require a political or a judicial solution to that if the SBA is going to hold it to the line on that. They've also suspended a number of companies from the 8A program for various reasons, saying he didn't respond to a data call that happened in January, it was due in January. Some of those suspensions have been lifted, some have not. But there are fewer 8A companies now than there were a year ago. And if this trend continues, there'll be even fewer next year. So there are fewer companies to even receive these contracts. And then, as you say, the pressure has been on, the rules have been tweaked to really emphasize competition over sole source, which for a long time, as you're correct in saying, especially as we got to the end of the fiscal year, 8A sole source was the easy button. Quickly award some money. We've got a great 8A right here who can do the work. That's still allowed, but there's definitely been a push to limit 8A sole source awards and make 8A kind of look more like some of the other programs, which for a long time I said, hey, maybe it makes sense to standardize the HUB-zone, women-owned, and service-disabled veteran-owned small business programs. So they also have the kind of sole source authority that 8A does. 8A has always had the most powerful sole source component. So all those things can make 8A right now. If someone says, should I apply to 8A right now? I'd say no, because they're not letting anybody in.
Yeah.
This is probably not the right time to apply, because you're going to get to the back of the line that's however many people have been waiting to get in since last year. Assuming they start processing those again tomorrow, it's still going to take a while to get to you. So the only exception might be if you're looking and saying, by the time I would apply, I'd be too big, I'd outgrow my size and I wouldn't qualify. Maybe you throw it in now. So I would look for that. I do think that for a little bit, there was this mindset out there, 8A, fraud, waste, abuse. I personally don't agree with that whatsoever. I think the 8A program, like anyone, any program, any group of contractors you look at, you're going to find folks who aren't following the rules. But the 8A program is actually the most heavily scrutinized of any of these programs already, because these folks work closely with the SBA. They have to submit annual reports, all sorts of things that most small businesses don't have to do. And so I think that the mindset that 8A is a fraudulent program was maybe said for political reasons or because some people had that belief, but I haven't seen much of that recently. And I hope that at least is going to be going away. And I hope the contract officers don't buy into that, because again, 8A has always had stricter oversight than pretty much any other program that I'm aware of in the government, with the SBA looking at closely at what these companies are doing throughout their 9 years of the program. So we'll see. But that sort of mindset, to the extent it percolates down to contracting officers, or to the extent contract officers get the sense, oh, my boss doesn't really want me to use 8A, that could be a kind of a soft push away from that program as well, subconsciously, but it could happen. I could see that we're saying, let's just go HubZone instead. Let's just go SDVSB instead, because in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, maybe somebody up the food chain is not going to like it if they see I'm awarded too many 8As. And I don't know to the extent to which that's true or not, but it definitely is a possibility, I think.
Now, I'm curious where you think there is the biggest space for non-compliance. Like, what are the things that you see companies getting wrong most often?
I think with respect to non-compliance, certainly in the small business programs, to my mind, it's going to be simply the small business set-aside, because that's a self-certification still. And anytime you have self-certification versus a formal self-certification by the government, there's a lot more opportunity to get things wrong. And that's not even necessarily fraud. It's just a lot of times there's people misunderstanding what can be complicated rules. And so on the small business program, for example, the folks can pretty easily calculate their revenues or their employee count and compare it to a size standard. Most people understand that, although even then sometimes people get that wrong. But then once you bring in affiliation, the question about whether you're affiliated with another business, those rules can be really complicated. There's economic dependence affiliation. You could be affiliated with a company owned by a close family member. They might aggregate interests. If the company is owned by 3 people each at 33.3%, all 3 of them control the company, so they might be affiliated with another company, even though none of them can make unilateral decisions. There are all sorts of complicated rules that people are then expected to know and self-certify under. And so what I found working with those rules is that people just misunderstand. There are some folks who just blatantly are fraudsters, and then there are people who are just lazy and they don't do their due diligence, and that's negligent self-certification. And then there are people who do their due diligence, but they just don't fully understand because it's complicated stuff and they get it wrong. And so all those areas can lead to non-compliance. And then you'll see there's so many areas. The FAR is chock full of all sorts of traps for contractors in terms of where you can inadvertently go awry. A lot of times it's fine, people don't get in huge trouble, but sometimes you can. So when you're getting into this space, even though it stinks to have to do it, you got to kind of figure out the rules that apply to your company, which is not the whole FAR, but it's whatever typically shows up in your contracts. And talk to a professional if you need to understand any rules you don't understand, and go from there. Because what can happen is you see folks who are doing something wrong for 5 years, then all of a sudden the government finds out, and now they're like, oh, I wish I had talked to you 5 years ago, but we don't have the DeLorean to go back and have that conversation. And now we're talking about how do we try to fix this with the government, not get you suspended, debarred, et cetera. So yeah, I would say for small business, make sure that you're self-certifying correctly, understand the affiliation rules, understand that each solicitation has its own size standard. So just because you're small in your primary industry doesn't mean you're small for every solicitation out there. You have to be small under that solicitation size standard. Those are some of the common problems that people have.
And I'm curious, do you see the size standards like shifting? I think I've seen size standards increase maybe twice now in my time in working with the government, and it's beneficial. It has its advantages, but I think it also creates sort of a little bit of confusion for folks that may not have stayed up to date and they're just not aware. Are all the changes that might come out in size standards, are all of those things going to be told to you directly? Do you get an email notifying you that you've exceeded your size standard and you're now not in compliance? Or like, how are companies staying up to date with this stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I spend a good chunk of my life staying up to date with this, and I don't have a government contracting business to run. So trying to do that and stay up to speed would be hard to do. In terms of your size calculation, if you're in the 8A program, this is where I say 8A is more heavy on the oversight than other programs, you have to submit your financials every year to the SBA. So they may well come back to you and say, hey, it looks to us like you've exceeded your size standard. But they don't do that for anybody else because you don't have to submit your financials. If you're just a regular small business, you're not submitting your financials to the government. You're looking at them internally and self-certifying in your SAM profile. After every fiscal year closes, you should take a look and say, hey, what does our SAM profile say with respect to the various NAICS codes we've listed, and are we still small under all these size standards? And so those size standards do change sometimes. About every 5 years, the SBA will go through and do a rolling adjustment on an industry-by-industry basis based on inflation and other data they have. Historically, they have not lowered size standards, but just increased them or kept them the same, although they do have the right to lower them if the economic conditions justified, but they haven't done that in the past. And they're not going to notify you of that either. You can find it in blogs like I write. You also see it when you see the next solicitation, because the solicitation cover sheet will list the NAICS code and the size standard and say, oh, I didn't realize that general construction was up to 45 million. I thought it was 39 or whatever it was. You'll see it on that solicitation. So that might be your first notification of that. But it is up to you as a contractor who's self-certifying to be a small business. Every year when your revenue fiscal year closes, if you're evaluating it on a revenue basis, and some contractors are sized based on employee count basis, but to keep an internal due diligence tally of what your size standard is and to adjust your SAM profile if needed. Some folks think that they only have to adjust their SAM profile once per year when it comes up for renewal. But in fact, every time you bid on a federal solicitation using the representations and certifications in your SAM, you are repping and asserting that everything in there is current, accurate, and complete as of the date of that you're bidding on that solicitation. So if there's anything in there that isn't accurate, you need to update your SAM mid-year to make that accurate. And that would include size standards. So if you have a list of 10 NAICS codes on your SAM profile, and some years check, yes, I'm small, some years, no, you're small. Once you have a new date on that, we outgrew the size standard under that NAICS code, you should go to your SAM profile and adjust that so you're not inadvertently miscertifying to the government that you're something that you're no longer small for that code.
Man, that is something that I guarantee you most small businesses are not doing and updating on a regular basis.
No,
I think it's probably
most people are doing it once a year.
Yep.
Yep. And there's a common misconception that, look, my SAM profile says I'm small under NAICS code X. I'm small for that code until I redo my SAM. And in fact, it's the other way around. Your size governs your SAM doesn't govern your size. And so when your size changes, you need to update your SAM. It's not that you get to wait until, now we have to update our SAM. So you got to update that in real time because, again, these certifications have to be current, accurate, and complete as of the date you're using those reps and certs in your SAM in connection with a federal bid, which is almost always the way it's done these days.
Wow. Yeah. There's just so many gotchas that could pop out of nowhere that you didn't see coming.
This is how I had a business.
My God.
But my favorite situation was always to let folks know about this ahead of time, to be the people who are proactive about getting this information. Those are the best clients for me to work with because I'm like, we can get you compliant on the front end instead of trying to save you when it comes in on the back end. So like that's once you've submitted that false certification, the government calls that false. That's a false certification, even though you would say it's a mistaken certification. It's still wrong. So say it's a false. Once you submitted that, now we're in damage control mode. And I'd rather be in preventative medicine mode rather than damage control mode as someone who's helping you in contracting space.
I love that. Proactive is the right approach. Reactive is always going to come with some damage control, some risk and mitigation, and a variety of other things that I'm sure folks don't want to get into. So for folks that are curious about how to stay up to date on all the things that you're talking about, how can they find you? Do they reach out on LinkedIn? And you mentioned a Substack. Like we're going to need all of those links, by the way. We'll put them all in the show notes.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, those are probably the two best ways to reach me and see what I'm writing about. And I have a Substack blog and newsletter called the FedLift Launchpad, which is only a few months old, but I did publish articles on there going back a couple years now. So it's got 100 plus articles on there about things that I think folks should know about in government contracting, usually about once a week or so. I'm publishing a new article. One just came out this morning as we're talking here, and subscribers get that for free. There's no charge for this newsletter. And so that's fedlift.substack.com, fedlift, fedlift.substack.com. And then on LinkedIn, I publish articles on there usually once a week, as well as several posts about things that I think are of interest to the government contracting community. It's really a great platform, by the way. If you're on LinkedIn and not really engaged in it, it's not just me out there. I learn a lot from following thought leaders like you, Chelsea, and others on LinkedIn who are posting really interesting takes on what's happening in government contracting. It can be a surprisingly good source of information if you're following the right people. I'd like to think I'm on that group, but I'm not the only one. There's a lot of great thought leaders out there who are publishing all sorts of free information. Please follow me on there if you're not already. And if you're interested in who else I'd recommend following, send me a direct message on LinkedIn. I'll give you a list of 10 or 15 folks that I think are worth following as well.
Awesome. I hope I make that list. And
absolutely. You're posting great stuff, Chelsea. Love your work. You do absolutely great work.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. This has been a fantastic conversation. We're going to get all those links in the show notes, and I'm sure that your subscribers on Substack are going to go through the roof after this episode. Your takes are just informative and thoughtful and just really interesting reads. I love following you. You've got great content. I really appreciate you hopping on the show this morning. This was a great conversation, and I think the folks out there are going to get a lot out of the episode.
Fantastic. Thanks again for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on the show. I've been such a fan of, and now I get to be part of. Again, appreciate the invitation, and I hope we get to do it again sometime.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening to GovCon Unscripted this week. Do your part, leave a heart, take a comment, share it, get it out there, get it in other people's ear holes, and make sure that they know about the show. And we'll see you next week for another episode of GovCon Unscripted.
Thanks for listening to this episode of GovCon Unscripted with your host, Chelsea Roberts. Do you have a GovCon story or need guidance in government contracting? Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn to be a guest on the show or to enhance your business strategy. Don't forget, your network is your net worth. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your growing GovCon community.